chapter 5, where we'll start tonight. By way of review, chapter 4, enemies of God's people had tried to stop the reconstruction of the temple, which began about 536. That's the first 5 verses, and verse 6 tells us of another accusation lodged against them to the Persian king. And verses 7 through 23 is a still later effort to stop, and notice what it says, this building of the city and the city walls. Verses 6 through 23 are long after the temple has been finished, so don't get confused. And then in verse 24, the last verse of chapter 4, we pick back up where we left off in verse 5 with the work on the temple stopping about 536 BC. Chapter 5, we have a little bit of good news because we're going to read about they finally get this temple rebuilt. And who are the two men who finally spurred them on enough to get it done? Haggai and Zechariah, almost the last 2 prophets listed in the Old Testament, came to them and said, hey, it's time for you to start this temple, which has been delayed for some roughly 15 years, 16 years has lapsed since they stopped construction in 536, so we're at about 520 or 521. And as I mentioned, those 2 prophets really get on the people because the outside opposition was not the only reason that the construction had stopped. Part of the reason lay in the Jewish hesitance to even want to get it done. They had become comfortable in their new surroundings and just got lazy. And I know all about that. Let's see, the prophet's message, by the way, you can read it. You ought to read probably the first 2 chapters of the book of Haggai anyway. He gets on pretty hard about their dereliction of duty and finally getting the temple finished. So after about a 16-year delay, the 2 prophets finally got things going. And then the provincial governor, when he hears about what is going on, named Tatnai, comes to them and asks, what are you doing? And I want a list of who's doing it and who gave you the authorization to do this. And so they gave him a complete list of the men working on the project. And verse 5 says, the Persians were moved by the Lord to allow the construction to continue while Tatnai investigated whether the Jewish claims to have authorization to start rebuilding the temple again were true or not. It would have probably taken folks a year to get the message from this obscure province of Jerusalem and Judea all the way to the Persian king, have it considered and the red tape involved, and get an answer back would have probably taken a year. So it was only by God's grace that these people, if you'll notice in here, said, we'll let the construction continue until we hear from the king about your claims to have an authorization to do this from Cyrus. Verses 6 through 17 is the report of the governor, Tatnai, and his officials of what he wrote to King Darius about this temple rebuilding effort. He told them what was going on in verse 8 and said, by the way, the builders we asked them for 2 things. We asked for a list of those who authorized the project, and we want a list of leaders of this to pass on, to the king so he'll know what's going on and who is responsible for it. And in verses 11 through 16, Tatnai, the governor, reports the rights that the Jews claimed to do this. They claim a religious right in verse 12. I want to read that with you. because it's probably to forestall a question or an accusation that's going to be lodged against them. But this is what the Jews told the Persian. Yes. Okay, I'm in chapter 5, verse 10. Okay, I'll try to be more careful about that. I'm sorry. Verse 12, and the Jewish answer to them, they had said this, but because our fathers had provoked the God of heaven to wrath, he gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this temple and deported the people back to Babylon. And that was probably to keep them from saying, well, if your God is so powerful, why did he allow this to happen? And so they tell them, well, this is why we find ourselves in this predicament with our land and our temple and our city destroyed. In verse 13, they claimed a legal right to rebuild that King Cyrus, 18 years ago, in 538, had issued a decree for the temple to rebuild. So, he reported in verses 14 through 16 a detailed explanation of all the legal claims for the Jews for the right to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. They claimed that King Cyrus had let them bring back all the silver and gold and the furnishings from the temple that Nebuchadnezzar had carried off many years before, some 80 years before. And they said that King Cyrus had appointed a man named Sheshbazzar to govern, and that the king had charged him to return all of these furnishings to the temple and be responsible for them. And the Jews claimed that Sheshbazzar had laid the foundation of the temple and that they had been working on it ever since. Now, when was the temple foundation originally laid? I don't see how many of you have been listening. What year did they start rebuilding the temple? 536. That's all right. The edict to let them go back was 538. They returned roughly in the year 537 and started laying the foundation initially for the temple in 536, and we are now at 520. He asked the king to search the royal archives and to verify that what these Jewish people are telling me is the truth. And he asked then, would you please send us a decision so that we can get this matter resolved? And that takes us through chapter 5. Any questions? Okay, chapter 6. We have Darius, King Darius' reply. So he takes Tatnai's advice and goes searching through the royal archives to see if they could find a record of 18 years ago, a record of King Cyrus issuing the decree to let these folks return. And they found it in way over here in a place called Ecbatana, which was the capital of the original Median Empire, which merged with the Persian Empire. It was Cyrus's old capital, by the way. And they found that indeed Cyrus had ordered that the temple be rebuilt. And Cyrus had further ordered something else that probably didn't make this Tatnai, the royal province governor, very happy. He says, I want the money to come from where to do this? The royal treasury. Not only do I want you to let them build it, I want the money to come out of your coffers to pay for it. He ordered that all the gold, verse 5, that all the gold and silver furnishings that Nebuchadnezzar had taken 70 years ago, he had ordered, just like they said, that those be taken from Persia back to Jerusalem, where they had been taken from by Nebuchadnezzar many years earlier. And then Darius then ordered Tatnai and his officials, stay away from these people. Do not interfere in any way with the construction project at all. And he ordered the temple to be built where? On its original site. He didn't want them to put it someplace else. He wanted it on the original foundations from which it had been torn down by Nebuchadnezzar in 586. That's an odd request a little bit to me. You would think that a pagan king wouldn't care where the temple was rebuilt, but he did. He wanted it built right where it was originally built.
Lloyd, didn't he die about 25 years after he conquered Israel?
Who? Darius or Cyrus?
Nebuchadnezzar.
I don't know when Nebuchadnezzar died.
Well, I got it in my mind that he died about 25 years after, and then the other group went there about 50 after, but that's a little bit late. They went before that.
Okay. All right. John?
You're saying 536, and that's right.
Not only in that decree did he specify on the size, he also specified the size and how it was to be built too. So he was pretty well involved.
He was probably trying to get it as an exact duplicate of what had been there, 50 years or so earlier from 586. Yeah, it seems that was his purpose. And we'll find out why, I think, pretty soon, why he might have wanted it done that way. In verses 8 and 9, like I said, he ordered the governor, just as Cyrus had said, back in 538, the next king, Darius, says, I want the money for this project to come out of the royal treasury, just as the previous king had said. And we learn from history that Persian kings consistently asked their conquered nations to rebuild their religious facilities, whatever they were. Whatever they were. So the Jews in this respect were not unique. He wanted all of them built, whether it was to God or whether it was to any idol or pagan deity. In verse 10, when we get there, will tell us why. So that the Jews could please their God. In fact, we ought to just go ahead and read that, and I want this done without fail, that they, that is the Jews, this is the king speaking, may offer acceptable sacrifices to the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and his sons. So did he have a selfish reason for wanting this temple built? He sure did. And we'll later say that I want you folks to pray for me and for the king's son also. So by reestablishing the religious element in every one of the nations that he conquered, he hoped that all of these people would, number one, be pacified by letting their original religious practices resume, which is good for the king to keep down rebellion and unrest. And two, so that all of these people, all over the Persian Empire, will be praying for the king and his sons. So he wanted prayers from Jehovah. He wanted prayers from Baal. He wanted prayers from Ashtoreth. He wanted prayers from Marduk, Baal, Nebo, all of the gods. And he was an idolater himself. So we see now why he wanted that temple built. I think we might say why he wanted that temple built exactly like it was supposed to be, so that the religious exercises the Jews carried on there would benefit the king and his sons. Yeah.
Wasn't he also one that went to the mouth of the lion's den and cried out to Daniel, wasn't he?
It may have been the same one. I'd have to go to Daniel and look. I don't remember. I think it's Daniel 3 or 4 if somebody wants to look. In the Cyrus cylinder, that is an artifact which was discovered years ago. We have a record of Cyrus uttering these words exactly. May all the gods whom I have resettled in their sacred cities ask daily Baal and Nebo for a long life from me. In other words, I need the prayers of everybody, whatever God you worship. So he did this for his own benefit and for the peace and safety and thus the revenue coming from these provinces. Verses 11 and 12, he says, by the way, if anybody interferes with this, they will suffer a severe penalty. for opposing the work of the rebuilding of the temple. So in effect, Tatnai, the provincial governor, his effort to stop the building of the temple really backfired. And then because he was ordered, by the way, I want you to pay for this out of your treasury, your income, probably from the income that the province of Judah generated. That's where I want the money to come from to help these people. Okay, verses 13 through 15, we finally, in the year 516, 4 years after they restarted it in 520, we get the temple finished. The Persian officials, by the way, did exactly what the Persian king said to do. And why?
So they could stay alive.
So they could stay alive. That's as simple as it is. You don't cross a king back then, and some of them over there today you still don't cross. The Jews completed the temple in 516. They held a celebration in verses 16 and 17. By the way, let's see. The word used in verse 16, I believe, is the Hebrew word Hanukkah for the celebration. And they still celebrate that today. I don't know when Hanukkah is, or December? Sometime in December?
Yeah, Festival of Lights.
The word is Hanukkah.
Oh, okay.
The word is Hanukkah. I'm not sure if it's connected with the celebration or not.
Jewish Hanukkah is connected with the cleansing of the temple miraculous one day.
Years later, 300 or 400 years later. Yeah, but the same word is used. Yeah. There was a big celebration and a lot of offerings made, and then they get the priests and the Levites assigned to their various duties so that with the temple complete, we can now restart the religious rites of the Jews according to the law of Moses. They reinstituted the Passover in verses 19 through 22, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which of course immediately followed the Passover. And by the way, verse 22, it notes the king of Assyria, and don't let that fool you. That was Darius. That was the same fellow we've been talking about, because a lot of people still called him that. Was he the king of Assyria? Technically, no. In fact, yes, because Assyria was part of his realm. He was part of it. Yes. He was king of Judah. He was king of Assyria. He was king of Babylon. But don't let that king of Assyria fool you, because the Assyrian Empire had been gone since about 606, almost 100 years ago. Okay, so we're going to leave these folks at 516 or 515 BC. And it was during this time that the Persian king makes a concerted effort to deal with another pesky group of people to their west who were growing more and more powerful and became more and more of a threat to the Persians' empire. Does anybody know who that great group of people might be? Immediately to the west. Greece. Yes. Have you ever seen the movie 300? Where 300 Greeks tried to stop the advance of the Persians, on a narrow pass. That was part of this. That was about 480 BC, right where we're going to be here in just a minute. Okay, any questions on the first 6 chapters of Ezra? Because we're going to leave Ezra, as I promised last week. Okay. It was Darius. Okay, the same that Daniel was dealing with in the lion's den. Okay.
Possibly more than one there was. It was 8 Darius, one
Could have been, yeah. Okay, let's turn a couple of books over to the book of Esther. Remember, we leave 515 BC. And we're moving to the year 483 BC. So we are moving down the line about 30 years, okay, of which we have no record of that's 30 years in the Bible. It just skips over it in silence. But the verse 1 tells us that it took place in the days of Ahasuerus, and I'm not going to call him Ahasuerus, I'm going to call him Xerxes, because that's the general way it's translated in most of the secular writings that we have. But he had two names. The events in Esther occur about 15 years before Ezra comes back to Jerusalem, and we'll be there in Ezra chapter 7. He comes back in 457, the second return. The first one we just read about. And it's about 38 years before Nehemiah comes back, which we'll read about in the book of Nehemiah. Now, it's been noted over and over and over again that there's no mention of God's name, there's no mention of the law, there's no mention of the covenant, there's no mention of any religious rites in the book of Esther at all. Why? I do not know, but I do know this. If you're looking for it, you cannot possibly overlook or miss the number of what would seem to be minor coincidences that take us from where we start in the book of Esther to where we end. So you can see, if you're looking closely enough, God working in the background, whether his name is in the book or not. And the book tells us of the Jews who remained in the Persian capital of Shushan, right down here. This is where it all takes place. That's the Persian capital at the time. And these are Jews who decided, for whatever reason, not to go back home. So this is completely different from where we left the first 6 chapters of Ezra. The Persian king is Xerxes. He ruled from 485 to 465. And how do I know that we're at 483? Because in verse 3 it says, in the 3rd year of his reign. If you got that list of Persian kings, you don't have any problem keeping straight. So we're at 483 years before Christ was born. He was Darius's son, Cyrus's grandson. And it appears that the book opens with the king sponsoring a 6-month display of the wealth and ostentatiousness of the Persian kingdom to impress some folks that he needed to impress. Because I said the year is about 483. In 481, he launches a major military campaign against the Greeks. So I think what he's doing here is calling in all of his military and civil advisors and drumming up support for this very expensive 4-year-long military campaign against the Greeks. And I think that's what we're reading about in begin with verse 3 through verse 4. And then in connection with that, there was also a huge banquet, and the term literally means a drinking feast. You can call it a banquet if you want. It was more accurately a drinking feast. So he, in verse 1, tells us about his huge empire, which went almost to present-day India. Let's see, where does it say? His India to Ethiopia, which included, of course, Egypt and the southern part of Egypt and Ethiopia. So he had a huge area that he was governing. He ruled from the city of Susa. I think Susa's on the map here. Oh yeah, I've showed you that before. And It is located today in what is known as southwest Iran. I think the Iranians were the original Persians. Let's see. All of his power and the lavish banquet is told to us in verses 3 through 6, and all the nation's business leaders, political leaders, and military leaders were asked to be there because they were going to be involved either directly in the military or by supporting this great effort that he was planning. And he probably used these 6 months during the celebrations to plan the military campaign against Greece, which he launched in 481 BC. And it is interesting to note that in 490 BC, the Greeks had soundly whipped his father in a battle. And so there was probably some resentment there and wanted to retaliate, perhaps. Verse 6 and 7, the king's vast wealth and luxury were on display, and royal wine was served. And there's a verse there that's a little bit confusing. Verse 8, my translation has this, quote, the drinking was done according to the law. And here's the law that the king made, and I'm adding that there was no one to be forced to drink, and these men and women were allowed to drink as much as they wanted to drink. That was the law that he made when that feast was initiated. And I think some other translations bring that out a bit clearer than my New American Standard. Meanwhile, the king's wife, a lady by the name of Vashti, was holding a separate banquet for the wives in verse 9 of the nation's leaders. We don't know why the banquet was separate. That was not required, even in that culture. But anyway, during this drinking party, the king gets the idea of, hey, let's call out Vashti, and I want you to see my beautiful queen, my beautiful wife. What do you think her reaction would have been, knowing that in there was men who had been drinking for 7 days, and no limit, whatever you wanted? And by the way, I don't know if your translations bring it out, but each one was given a separate, expensive goblet, different from everyone else's. Gold, yes, yes.
You got a problem when you get a bunch of drunks.
Yes, yes. And notice that he sent, let's see, the king's command in verse 12 was delivered by eunuchs. Why do you have eunuchs dealing with your women? It's obvious.
Yeah.
Okay, they present no sexual threat at all. Secondly, you want eunuchs who are not going to have any descendants and thus have any pretensions to the throne. That eliminates both problems. Keeps them happy. And so all the kings had eunuchs dealing with their harems for obvious reasons. Let's see.
Somebody had to kill the bugs.
Somebody what?
Had to kill the bugs.
John, I'm not sure how much that added to the class, but we'll move on. Now, is there any indication that the king wanted her to do anything immoral or immodest? No, there's not. There's not. He just wanted to show everybody and brag that I have a beautiful wife. But there's also, in this particular time frame, the fact that she was pregnant with Artaxerxes I. And so she may have been pregnant at the time and had no desire to go parade herself. And in either case, before a bunch of drunks who were used to having their way with women, by the way. And when she said, no, I'm not coming to a Persian king, he became extremely angry and upset. And I'm sure another word would apply that's not in there, embarrassed. Yeah, he lost face. That's a good way of putting it. When you've got all of your civil, business, and military leaders together, and you send an order to send the queen in here, and she says no? Oh, boy, that is a big, big problem.
He was drinking that block and tackle, Lloyd.
Sir?
He was drinking, that king was drinking that block and tackle himself.
Okay.
He tried to do it, and walk block and tackle line.
Haven't heard that one before. Yeah.
If she gave birth to his son, she would almost had to be pregnant, or just had that, because everything looked at her off.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's a good possibility that that was her condition, so. He decides to consult with his advisors for their legal counsel about what should we do in this kind of a situation. This is embarrassing, and I'm extremely upset by what Vashti has done. And so he charges the queen with insubordination, of defying a direct order, of the king. And a fellow by the name of Memucan presents his advice of the 7 people, advisors, that in verse 16, that the queen's defiance of his orders had wronged not only the king, but also all Persians when they hear about it. So the queen was allowed to defy the king's order. Others, if that stood, then other women throughout the empire would feel that, hey, if they can do as they please with the king, surely I can do as I please with my old man. Okay, I can do what I please. She gets away with it, I should be able to get away with it. That was their fear. That was their fear. That it would, her defiance would encourage all the women throughout the realm to rebel against their husbands, and there would be no way to stop, in verse 18, the disrespect and contempt that they would show for their husbands. And so the king issued a royal decree that could not be repealed or revoked. And why would they issue a decree like that? I know for one reason, because if it can be revoked or changed later, and Vashti is restored to the throne as queen, guess whose heads roll? Yes, these 7 advisors. So, hey, you make sure that this sticks, and sticks permanently, so that she has no chance to be reinstated. Yeah. Yeah.
According to historical record, according to my text, now,
Okay.
commentary,
Yeah.
that she was, when she was supposed, that she still had a lot of influence because she was the mother of Artaxerxes, and at the death of Vashti, at the death of Esther,
I was going to say.
at
Okay.
the death of Esther, that Vashti was able to reassert her position and came back into control.
Is that on the historical records?
I don't know where this came.
Okay, I never did read that.
I don't know. It's in
Okay.
the commentary section.
Okay,
It is not,
we're going to have to stop here. Go ahead.
it's not in the archaeological evidence and stuff.
Okay.
So it's, I don't know.
Okay. Anyway, let's leave right there, and by the way, you can mark in your margin that Queen Vashti was deposed in 484 BC. 484. And they're going to go about 4 years, which is the time that, by the way, that military campaign against the Greeks took before Esther is elevated to the throne through God's marvelous providential working for his people. Any questions or comments? Let's pray. Father, we ask that you dismiss us in your love. Help us to love you and help us to love one another and to take these words of your message to us into our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen.